Hey guys! Part 4 of What If Naruto Joined the Justice League. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 6: Forging a New Path. I remember our first meeting. It was literally something I couldn't have ever hoped to anticipate, and over the weeks that followed, simply describing everything that happened as complicated, well, that would have been extremely generous. However, if I could go back in time and do it all over again, and I'm sure that if I really put my mind to it, there are a couple of ways I still wouldn't change a single thing. There were good days, there were dark days, and there were weird days in between, but each and every day I spent with you were among the best of my life. It's been one hell of an adventure, and through it all, I've never felt more alive. The Uzumaki Journals, entry number 9417. Exosphere, somewhere above the western coast of Australia's shores. Naruto couldn't help but revel in the sensation of using Sage Mode, as he floated near the outer reaches of Earth's atmosphere. The Indian Ocean lay directly below him, some 250 kilometers away, with the continent of Australia fully visible in the distance. The spot he was currently hovering in was the same place where he had modified and used the sword of Ninoboku to strike Darkseid from the sky, with its full power a few weeks ago. The sheer power behind that one attack had left devastating effects on the atmosphere in the region, severely degrading it to the point that Naruto had to return and help repair it. Otherwise the flora, fauna and people living in the region would have all began to suffer from negative environment factors, created in the wake of that battle. With what was basically a giant hole in the Earth's atmosphere, or at the very least a weak spot, there would have been increased vulnerability to solar emissions that the atmosphere would have normally protected against. This would have resulted in things such as increased risks of getting cancer, erratic and dangerous weather patterns, several endangered animals going extinct due to severe changes in their natural habitat, and 1,000 other little things. Thankfully, with some liberal usage of the white, and the guidance of the Parliament of Vapors, it was a fairly easy matter for Naruto to fix. Naruto had only just finished with the repairs to the atmosphere mere moments ago. Most of the work had been done by allowing the minds from the Parliament of Vapors into his mindscape, where they could monitor and better direct his usage of the white, in order to repair the damaged atmosphere more efficiently. Of course, Naruto wasn't so foolish as to allow them direct control over his body or true access to his mind, and the precious memories it contained. Even the section of his mindscape in which they resided was essentially sealed off from the rest of his mind, and at any point in time that he felt like it, he could have kicked them all out of his mind in the blink of an. Making sure he was constantly in complete control of his mind and body throughout the whole process had been one of his top priorities before he decided to let the consciousnesses from the Parliament in. Furthermore, throughout the whole process he had diligently maintained the security of his mindscape, constantly ensuring that the only thing the Parliament was able to do was give him guidance on how to better use the white. Naruto had already mentally smacked around 2 inquisitive minds that had tried to sneak off while he was busy, to take a sneak peek at his memories without permission. The further detonation of a few well-aimed tailed beast balls within his mindscape went a long way towards reminding the entire Parliament of Vapors that he was no pushover, and that they were guests. The fact that he could reshape his mindscape at will into whatever he imagined only helped to reinforce this point. Sighing in mental exhaustion, Naruto felt the last of the various minds belonging to the Parliament of Vapors completely exit his mindscape, along with 97% the accumulated energy of the white that he had gathered to repair the atmosphere. It was no longer needed now that the atmosphere was fixed, and that extra energy would be better off being redistributed to some other corner of the planet to maintain its delicate biosphere. He still had about roughly 3% of the total power he had gathered, and that was more than enough power to easily fly at low hypersonic speeds and create powerful lightning blasts, without using a drop of his personal chakra. Naruto took that leftover energy of the white and mixed it into his chakra anyway. During the battle against Darkseid, Naruto accidentally entered into a new combat state, an enhanced form of his 6-path Sage Mode, after he absorbed only 6 different types of the abundant natural energies present on Earth. It was a mere fluke, an impossible stroke of luck really, but for a time it gave him the kind of power needed to physically fight an exceptionally powerful god to a standstill. The only thing he could even think of likening to how it felt to have access to that much power would have been if he had opened all 8 of the 8 inner gates technique while simultaneously using 6 paths sage mode. Especially the Death Gate. It was not the first he had fought a divine being. That honor belonged to Kaguya Otsutsuki. However, Darkseid's power completely eclipsed the rabbit goddess, to a terrifying extent, and yet since coming to this world Naruto had also grown significantly stronger. And it was in the heat of battle, in that one moment where Darkseid was pummeling him to pieces and should have successfully ended him with ease, that he tapped into it. It was a mere stroke of luck, and an ability that even in the form he had used it at the time was still very imperfect, but now that he entered into that enhanced 6 paths sage mode and was aware of its existence, Naruto could actively work towards doing it again. And this time, when he succeeded, he would enter into a perfect enhanced state. He just needed to figure out the right combinations of nature energy to use, and how to properly balance them all. It was the kind of power he needed in order to defeat the kind of enemies that even Superman struggled to wrestle into submission, and unfortunately, Earth had a great many beings of such power. To that end, Naruto had slowly been working on mastering how to combine chakra and at least one type of the different natural energies of Earth into a senjutsu-like mix, to see how they worked and slowly figure out how to recreate his enhanced state. Each combination of a natural energy and chakra provided Naruto with new abilities to use and a wide variety of options for different situations. Despite how promising his new avenue of training looked, he had only just started with his experimentations, and he was already struggling to deal with a rather big hurdle in the form of the fact that he couldn't use magic at all. He could draw it towards himself and absorb it into him like a sponge, but using it like all the other types of nature energy seemed beyond him. Every time he tried, his body went numb and he began to feel extremely lethargic, while his mind felt like he was being covered in a blanket, making him desire sleep. This strange effect had put him in a small coma after the fight against Darkseid, making him extremely wary of using magic. Unfortunately, magic was one of the 6 energies he had previously absorbed in order to enter his enhanced state. His body just didn't know what to do with the stuff. Still, he didn't let this discourage him. It was only a matter of time, practice and dedication before he would finally figure out and master that enhanced 6 paths sage mode. However, for the time being, Naruto was just going to enjoy using the different energies, one at a time, until he mastered them all. He was already very proficient with the white, and he deeply enjoyed the feeling of being able to fly and control the weather. He could sort of do it already with 6 paths sage mode and chakra, but the sheer precision control that the white gave him was in an entirely different realm. Sadly, for him, Naruto's watch chose that moment to begin flashing an eye-catching blue, drawing his attention to it, and reminding him of the alarm he'd set for himself earlier. It was still an hour before his scheduled noon meeting, but that just meant he needed to wrap things up here. Sighing, once again, Naruto muttered under his breath in a voice that only a Kryptonian specifically listening for him would have heard. "I need to get to National City soon." Dropping from his stationary position in low orbit, Naruto allowed himself to fall through atmosphere. The wind whipped his golden locks around his face wildly, and the temperature quickly rose as he picked up speed, his skin heating up, but not in an uncomfortable way. The white simply negated any harm the atmosphere could ever inflict on him, much like the blue allowed him to feel completely at home while submerged underwater. The whole experience was quite comfortable actually. As he sped towards the water below, his perception of time also sped up until he was processed a second in the real world as several hours within his mindscape. With the parliament of vapors gone, he was finally free to go to the one place he had constantly guarded from their minds while they were in his head, along with every other being on the planet with psychic abilities. A place he ensured no one would ever know even existed and was even more sacred to him than his own memories, his seal. It was the home of Kurama, ever since the tailed beast had been sealed there on the day Naruto's birth, a place he had grown intimately familiar with over the years as he developed a friendship with the giant tailed beast and later on, its siblings. It was a place that in many ways was like a piece of Konoha or the elemental nation that Naruto could constantly carry around with him, and now that he was so very far away from home, that last little fact made it almost sacred to him. Emerging within his mindscape, there was a pitter-patter sound to his footsteps as he was walked across the shallow water covering the cave floor. It was new configuration his seal had taken after he befriended Kurama and the other tailed beast fragments. Green glowing veins of some unknown mineral or could be seen in the walls of the cave, along with few ninjutsu-style markings carved into the stone. Light was provided by the glowing mineral veins in the walls and bioluminescent plants growing in the shallow water, giving the whole cave an ethereal aqua-white colored glow. Naruto ignored all this, focusing only on the one thing that mattered in this place, Kurama and the tailed beast, or rather what was left of him and the others. It was the same as every other time he'd come here, since the day he first checked for their presence, after arriving on Earth. The mightiest of the tailed beasts, and the fragments of the others he had gained during the war, had all been reduced to lifeless marble statues. Whatever had happened in between his arrival on Earth and his banishment from the elemental nations, it had done something to Kurama and the other tailed beasts, something bad. Instead of his majestic nine-tailed friend, there was now a giant 300-foot-tall, admittedly lifelike, statue of the fox. Kurama's lifeless, majestic form was snarling in rage at something, all 9 of his tails raised high in an aggressive manner, while his slit-pupilled eyes glared in defiance. Naruto could imagine the color of his fiery orange coat, the glow of his scarlet eyes, along with shades of black fur here and there that made up Kurama's being. Yet these things only resided in his memory. No matter how much he wished it, the white marble refused to morph into his friend. The unfortunate reality was that Kurama was trapped, along with the others. Gyuki, Chomei, Saiken, Koko, Son Goku, Isabu, Matatabi and Shikaku were all present, in the form of miniature 20-foot statues surrounding Kurama's 300-foot form. All of them made of the same white marble-like material, and all of them glaring in the same direction as Kurama, with their tails raised at some invisible threat. The 8 fragments were all that were left of the original tailed beast who had been absorbed into the Jubi and then Madara and finally Kaguya, or rather they were the consciousnesses of those tailed beasts while their raw power and essence was absorbed by the Jubi. Just seeing Kurama and others looking like that, looking so lifelike yet so helpless, utterly pissed Naruto off to a degree he hadn't believed himself capable of ever feeling. They were trapped and helpless, and he could not recall anything about what had happened during that blank period before he woke up on Earth. To him it was as if, one moment he was battling Kaguya across dimensions, and then the next he was here on Earth. However, something had clearly happened in between those 2 points, otherwise the tailed beasts wouldn't be statues. And Naruto was willing to bet that whatever Kurama and the tailed beasts had been doing before they ended up the way they were, it was something to protect Naruto and get him to Earth in one piece. Willing himself to float until he rose to eye level with Kurama's statue form, Naruto placed the palm of his hand on the tailed beast's snout. He could feel Kurama's spirit and his chakra trapped deep within the statue, alive but unable to get out, helpless. It was the last thing he ever thought he would describe Kurama as ever being. Even with all the times he had been captured and sealed, Kurama had never truly seemed helpless to Naruto, which was why seeing him and the others like this felt so wrong. Naruto had already tried several discreet solutions to get the fox and the other tailed beasts free, but so far nothing had worked. Naruto wanted to try a few more things before he resorted to asking for help from those he truly trusted, particularly Nimu and maybe a few others in the league if she couldn't help him fix this. He might love the sister of King Arthur dearly, sometime as even more than just a friend, and Naruto completely trusted her. However, he hadn't informed her of Kurama's presence inside of him yet, mostly because it was something so personal to him, so sacred that it felt wrong sharing it with anyone else now that he was in different, very strange world. He had done this despite knowing that Madame Xanadu had the ability to see the future, and was quite possibly already very aware of the fox's existence. However, she had never said anything about it to him, and Naruto was thankful to her for that. Naruto was fully aware that if Kurama had been there from the moment he first arrived, things would have been very different. Naruto doubted he would have accepted Madame Xanadu's offer to host him and help him. He definitely wouldn't have involved himself in the fight against Darkseid. His only concern would have been for himself, Kurama, and the other tailed beasts, and he wouldn't have let any of the people he was now growing close to into his heart. Kurama's mere presence would have crippled his ability to make new friends and overcome his loneliness. Of this Naruto was positive. Yet he couldn't help but miss the mean-tempered furball he had befriended during the war, along with all Kurama's siblings. Technically speaking, they were his siblings too, in the spiritually sense, seeing as Naruto was the reincarnation of the younger son of the Sage of the Six Paths, and the tailed beasts as his creations were also the sons and daughters of Hagoromo Otsutsuki. Just as the absence of the tailed beasts meant that Naruto was forced to make friends and new connections in this strange world, he was coming to call home. Had Kurama and the tailed beasts been conscious, his bond with the proud fox and its siblings would have grown even stronger than it had ever been while in the elemental nations. The nine-tailed fox would have been a source of familiarity, wisdom, and someone else connected to his past life, and the other tailed beasts would only reinforce this bond. Naruto could see both paths easily within his mind's eye, but only one had been allowed to him, and it wasn't a choice. If he had been given a choice in the matter and the knowledge of where either choice lead, Naruto found himself unsure of whether he would have chosen Kurama and the other tailed beasts or let things play out the way they did, despite the friends he had gained in the form of the Justice League and Madame Xanadu. In some ways he found himself glad that he had never been given the choice, and in others, very bitter. Objectively speaking, Naruto knew that without Kurama present or anything else to truly attach him to his past, he had been forced to grow and to change, hopefully for the better. However, that didn't alter the simple fact that he dearly missed his furry friend, just as much as he missed everyone else back home. With his palm on Kurama's snout, Naruto whispered within the silence and privacy of his seal. "I miss you so much, buddy. I will find some way to free you from this state, I promise you that, and you know how I am with promises. Then we will make whoever did this to you pay," he finished with a growl. VVV. The Wayne family holiday house, 20 miles outside of National City, California. "This is for us?" Naruto asked in surprise as he marveled at the old Victorian-styled mansion before them. It was rather big after all, especially for just two people. Batman in his Bruce Wayne identity had brought Naruto and Mera out to the California coast, less than 20 miles from National City, where his family owned a seaside mansion that they had simply taken to calling their National City holiday home back when Bruce was a kid. Even many years after Martha and Thomas Wayne's passing, the building remained a beautiful and well taken care of facility, surrounded by lush gardens filled with vibrant flowers, water fountains, and Greek statues. However, it was still a very old mansion that looked like it had been literally ripped from right out of another era and transplanted into the modern day. That the mansion even had electricity was surprising to Naruto. The whole place just looked ancient, despite being surrounded by massive walls and a very high-tech gate. The property had clearly been intended as a place of privacy for the Waynes, to allow them to get away from the hustle and bustle of Gotham and the public life of a billionaire family, so that they could spend some time simply being a normal family. "If you don't like it, I could always buy you that island you wanted?" Bruce joked. Well, maybe. The guy was beyond simply being described as stinking rich, and could afford to buy multiple islands and probably entire nations if he wanted to. Nevertheless, it was surprising to hear his light-hearted tone while he was in his Bruce Wayne mask, and it was very much a mask despite it being the identity that he was born with. At his core, Bruce was Batman through and through. The persona of Bruce Wayne was simply a mantle he put on over Batman, even if it was technically his real identity. Batman didn't laugh or crack jokes. There was no time for that with the dangerous situations he was constantly getting into, and the kind of life he lived. Furthermore, when you saw as much cruelty and outright evil as Batman did on a day-to-day basis, in that hellhole of a city he called home, it wasn't surprising that Bruce was always so broody and dour when in costume. However, as Bruce Wayne, he needed to smile in order to play the role of a wealthy CEO playboy and philanthropist, with far too much money and far too little common sense. He needed to laugh and be heard laughing. To be charismatic and joke, he needed to draw other people to him and make them laugh hard enough that the very idea of him secretly being Batman was too absurd for them to even consider. If he was being honest, the false way Bruce lived his life was absolutely horrible in Naruto's opinion. However, he also respected the hell out of Bruce for sticking with it, and the sheer willpower necessary to live that kind of life. In many ways it reminded him of ANBU operatives and their double lives, but without the cool chakra powers. No need. The ninja waved him off with a small grin. This is more than perfect. Thank you, Bruce. He finished as he turned to the billionaire, sincerely thanking him. Naruto didn't mind staying at Nimu's place. In fact, he rather enjoyed it, both the magical quirks of her emporium and the woman's company. But that was also the problem. Nimu needed space to do her own thing and a chance to not have to constantly worry about him anymore, and he needed space too, in order to grow somewhere away from her oversight. The former princess of Camelot had taken such good care of him, for the entire time he had lived in her home, helping him learn about so much in the world, and Naruto would always be grateful for that. However, he needed to be able to truly stand on his own 2 feet without her guidance or counsel, and he simply couldn't do that while living in her home, no matter how much he enjoyed it. Which was why Bruce's offer of home was so appealing to Naruto. Furthermore, every lesson he had learned while living with Nimu would come in handy with him moving into this mansion. Particularly because he wouldn't be living here alone. Yes. It's very kind of you to offer your home to us, my friend. Mera spoke up from beside him, just as grateful to Batman. This mansion would be their home from now on, and the home of perhaps other heroes further down the line. Batman had asked him to help keep an eye on Mera, since he got along with her pretty well, and since Naruto was going to be teaching Mera how to use her hydrokinesis in a manner similar to water-release ninjutsu, this worked out for both of them. Besides, the only other person who Mera was really comfortable with at the moment was Diana, and the Princess of Themyscira was still tied up with her ambassadorial duties in Washington. At least that was the case whenever she wasn't out kicking ass in her superhero identity. How that woman is such a good multitasker without the ability to make clones of herself, I will never know. Naruto privately thought. With a simple nod of acknowledgement, Bruce said, "It's not a problem. I'm not using this mansion for anything else, and you both needed a place to stay, somewhere that the League can easily contact you in case of an emergency that requires the entire team to assemble." Naruto ignored the pointed look he was getting and the dig at the extra-dimensional nature Madame Xanadu's emporium. "Though I'd like to ask you two a favor?" Naruto shrugged as he casually replied, "Sure. If it's in my power to grant." Mera responded far more cautiously. Nodding, Bruce said, "National City is 20 miles away. I would appreciate it if you would both watch over it. Gotham, Metropolis, Central City, Coast City, Amnesty Bay and many more cities have their own protectors now. I would like for you two to step into that role, here in National City. I take it that that's why you brought us to this mansion in particular, instead of the 50 others you probably have?" Naruto asked with a grin. With National City being along the coast, it allowed for easy access to the sea, which was simply perfect for Mera. Then there was his own minor history with the city. Bruce merely shrugged. "You first encountered one of Darkseid's parademons in National City, Naruto. I thought it simply fitting for you to return here. After all, this is essentially where you began your superhero journey," he said to the blonde trans-universal ninja, before turning to Mera and adding, "As for you, Mera, I'll be blunt. You are powerful, incredibly so, and with National City being a coastal city, operating out of here suits you well. This particular mansion is also the only holiday home near a coastal city that I currently have, which made it an obvious choice for you. However, Mera, you're also very new to the ways of the surface, and quite frankly, with the way things are between you and Aquaman, I think leaving you on your own is a terrible idea. There is no question that you'll make a great superhero, but I think you first have to get yourself back together, and for that to happen, I think you'll need a friend. Which is why both you and Naruto will be living in this mansion and working together. Are you okay with this, Naruto?" Mera asked hesitantly, as she turned to face Naruto. Naruto gave her a reassuring smile and replied, "Don't worry about me. I'm more than okay with this. It also solves a lot of minor issues I would have had to deal with." Naruto quickly thought of his visit to Gotham the other day. He and Batman never really got around to talking about his plans, mostly because a bunch of Arkham Asylum inmates chose that evening to escape en masse, making a lengthy discussion about future plans difficult. However, through the snippets of information they exchanged while taking down villains and dragging them back to Arkham, Bruce was easily able to infer that Naruto had something planned for Mera and was okay with them living together. It also helped that since Naruto and Diana were the closest people to Mera outside of Aquaman, either one of them were far more likely to agree with living in the same house as the redhead. However, Aquaman was the last person Mera wanted anything to do with at the moment, and Diana was unfortunately tied up with Washington and its politics. She was after all Themyscira's ambassador to the world of man, which left Naruto as the only option. The Princess of Zeeble smiled softly and said to Batman, "If that's the case, then I thank you for your hospitality, Bruce." Mera's head lowered a fraction, in not quite a bow but clearly a respectful posture. An Atlantean thing both men simply assumed. "Think nothing of it, and welcome to, well, your new home," Bruce finished awkwardly, before adding, "You should probably think of a proper name for it since it's technically your superhero hideout, and feel free to decorate and make changes to it as you see fit. As long as you don't burn it to the ground or completely modify it into something unrecognizable or too eye-catching. The last thing you need is to attract attention to your hideout. Now come along, I will show you two around." With that, the two followed Bruce Wayne into their new home, paid close attention to everything he pointed out about the old building. VVV. The Wayne Holiday Home, National City. The mental strain of simultaneously keeping her beautiful red hair out of her face, while maintaining perfect balance as she did a one-handed handstand, was beginning to get to her, particularly because she was performing the feat on an ever-shifting surface of water. Princess Mera of the underwater kingdom of Zeeble had been working on this exercise for the last 2 hours, using the mansion's indoor swimming pool, while a clone of a Naruto tapped the surface of the water at random intervals to create ripples and small waves. She had already fallen into the water more times than she cared to remember, and was embarrassed by how difficult the whole exercise was proving to be. With naught but a thought, she could have turned the entire Olympic-sized swimming pool's worth of water into a mass as hard as concrete. With that one action, she would have been able to remaining hand-standing on it, perfectly still, with either one of her hands for days on end. The one-armed handstands, after all, were not that difficult. However, that would also defeat the purpose of the entire exercise. Water was dynamic and always in motion, thus water walking and by extension performing handstands on the surface of water was as much about keeping upright as it was about maintaining your balance by shifting with and against the flow of the water beneath you, or so Naruto had explained. With each ripple and wave that the Naruto clone created in the swimming pool, Mera had to adjust her center of balance to compensate for the movement of the water, while ensuring she was constantly pushing the water beneath her palm down, in order to keep the rest of her body above the water surface. Ultimately, this exercise was forcing Mera to connect with her powers and the water in ways she wasn't used to connecting, ways far more intimate than normal. She was using her powers both as an active participant in this training and subconsciously, and through this, she was beginning to feel the water and to anticipate how it flowed. Counteracting the waves, ripples and disturbances Naruto's clone was continuously creating as time went on. Mera was not entirely sure about any of the underlying technical details behind the lesson that Naruto was trying to teach her here, but she didn't need to understand them. She could feel her body adapting to the strain of the exercise, and her control over her power increasing. The mere fact that it had been over 30 minutes since she last fell into the water, and that she was not putting in as much focus to sustain the technique as when they began, was proof of her improvement. There was something fundamental going on here that Naruto was aware of, and she had yet to fully comprehend. All of Naruto's lessons since he began to teach her a day ago had been like this, and she really appreciated them. Every lesson so far had had multiple lesser lessons built into it, and despite some of them being rather easy, Mera was constantly being kept on her toes by Naruto, as well as being shown a different way of approaching a problem, or a unique way of thinking. It was quite exhilarating if she was being honest. The Princess of the Sea just wished the original Naruto hadn't dumped a clone on her to continue the lesson before heading off to the city. Naruto had left the mansion 2 hours ago on a grocery run to the supermarket somewhere in National City, stating that Batman had forgotten to stock the fridge properly, so they were low on supplies. Naruto had made a single clone before leaving, which had been the one to begin the day's training. All things considered, it wasn't that unreasonable for him to leave like that. However, Naruto could have just as easily sent the clone to get the groceries in his place while he remained here with her. Perhaps it was just her being selfish and wanting him around all the time. To herself, she mentally added, before brushing away that thought. Mera still wasn't ready to deal with those kinds of emotions, not so soon after catching King Orin and her sister Hila together. Her feelings were still far too raw, and every time that she saw King Orin, Mera's memories went back to that day in Atlantis when she'd found the two in the very bed that she had once shared Arthur. For Mera, simply being away from King Orin at the moment was the best thing that could have happened to her. The only problem is that Naruto makes it so damn easy to like him, and whenever he's around, I forget all of the pain that bastard put me through. She mentally growled with a ferocious scowl, but paused, as she briefly reconsidered the direction of her thoughts, before mentally adding, "Well, it's not really a problem or Naruto's fault that I am the way I currently am. It's just that it's so easy to be around him that I'm afraid of what will happen next. I'm not ready for anything right now, yet a part of me is also very excited to see what happens, and I am not the only one. Diana likes him too." Cursing under her breath at her thoughts, Mera refocused her attention on the task at hand. It wouldn't do to suddenly fall into the water due to a major lapse in her attention. Though she did note that even while distracted by her thoughts, her body had continued to counter the ripples and waves Naruto's clone continuously to created. She was improving rapidly still. When will the original come back? His clone is so silent, it's uncanny. If I hadn't personally witnessed him make that copy, I would have suspected it was an imposter. She thought in irritation at this particular clone's quirks. Naruto had already been gone for a few hours now, and despite her appreciation of the training and her complete faith in Naruto as a teacher, Mera couldn't help but find the clone's silence, and by extension the lesson itself, quickly growing boring. If the real Naruto had been around, he would have cracked at least one joke, told her a story, and then done a bunch of stuff to try and distract her while she trained. It would have been annoying to deal with, but the instruction that followed when she made a mistake and failed, and the way he would compliment her looks, all in one go, never failed to amuse her and make the training fun. Meanwhile, this particular clone had yet to initiate any form of communication with her, other than to give her orders in almost robotic tone, and it was getting creepy. "I don't understand why you have me doing this," she asked, finally fed up with the silence and accompanying boredom. Talking gave her something to focus on, that wasn't the eerie silence, or the original Naruto's absence, or her past. Half the reason she had been putting her all into these training sessions was simply so that she didn't have to think about her past and all the baggage that came with it. Clearly, if I can do a one-armed handstand on the water surface, then I can stand on it just as easily. Shouldn't I be focused on something else? She continued, a hint of annoyance in her voice as she asked the question. With a tired-sounding sigh, the silent clone replied, "I assure you, Mera, I am not wasting your time. As an Atlantean, and one with hydrokinetic abilities, your understanding of how to move in water surpasses mine by a significant margin. You are also about as good at moving and living on land as any human born on the surface." The clone paused here, suddenly looking far more alive than at any other point since his creation. However, moving on the surface of water is an entirely different beast altogether. The most similar thing to water walking is actually tree hopping, ironically, well, similar in the principle, but somewhat different in execution. The Naruto clone explained from the side of the pool where he was standing. "How so?" she asked, curious about where this was going, as well as just eager to keep the Xerox of Naruto talking. Shifting her feet slightly, she countered a ripple she could sense coming her way. "For one, water is not static," he began, before hopping off the edge of the pool and onto the surface of the water, causing multiple ripple and a large swell in the water that changed into a small wave. With the water so violently disrupted, Mera had to really work in order to avoid losing her balance, however she quickly adjusted. Shifting her weight around with her feet to maintain the handstand, she pushed off the surface in order to hop over the small wave, before coming down in a perfect handstand, all the while listening attentively as Naruto continued his lesson. Water is fluid, it's dynamic and constantly in motion. Kind of like the wind, as you leap through the trees from one tree bough to another. You can't expect the tree not sway when the wind blows, and you shouldn't expect the water not have waves, ripples and currents. You're strong enough to lift a tank above your head all day long, so telling you to do a handstand and thus lift your own body weight does absolutely nothing for you in terms of building your strength or conditioning your muscles. It's not straining in any way. However, doing so with only one hand, while keeping yourself suspended above the water surface changes things. Not only do you have to concentrate on keeping yourself afloat, but you have to maintain your center of balance on a surface that is inherently unstable, a surface that is constantly changing. This, my friend, is the core of water walking and to an extent, tree hopping. Water will always shift beneath your feet, and you must shift your center of mass with it, to compensate and keep yourself upright, all the while keeping yourself above the water's surface. Mastery of water walking means that you are capable of doing all this without actively putting any thought into it. Do you think you are quite ready for that yet? Because if so, this lovely property has a bit of ocean attached to it, less than 300 meters away from here, and with the recent storms and choppy waves, it's perfect for the next step in your training. He finished with a savage grin that gave Mera shivers due to how sadistic it seemed. Shaking her head in denial, even though it caused her hair to whip into her face in an annoying manner, she quickly announced, "No! I think I would prefer to master the basics, rather than humiliate myself out there." "Good answer," Naruto replied with a chuckle, before he said in a warmer and somewhat impressed tone, "You're a genius when it comes to water manipulation, Mera, so the original expects you to pick things up very quickly. The fact that you figured out how to use your hydrokinetic abilities to at least stand on water, after a mere hour, is simply proof that he is correct his beliefs. Even this exercise shouldn't take you more than a week to master, and I get the distinct feeling that it will take far less than that, whereas it took the original me just under a month of intense training to water walk before he could do it on a subconscious level, and he's considered a quick learner. With that said, as your teacher, you need to trust us to know when you need to move forward. Whether me or the original, our sole purpose in training you will be to bring out the best in both your abilities and you as a person. If we rush too far ahead, there will be opportunities missed, things you won't have a chance to learn about, some of which are things that you will need to figure out for yourself, while others we will help you with." Mera paused for a moment, almost awed by the fact that the clone had spoken as it had. That had been a mouthful, and not only that, but the clone was far more lively than before. Almost like. Mera abandoned the thought, choosing to instead say, "I already know this, and I trust you. It's just." "Just what?" it asked her curiously. With a sigh, Mera replied, "No offense to you, but Naruto just left me here with you. He could have stayed and sent you to get the groceries, instead he chose to go. I'm not saying there is anything really wrong with this, and perhaps wanting him here is selfish, it's just that dash. You miss him, and even if I am his clone, I am not him." The clone finished for her, and she found that she couldn't deny his words. She wouldn't have put it that bluntly, but the clone had gotten to the heart of what she was feeling. Lowering her head in shame, she said, "I'm sorry." Mera knew that Naruto's clones were technically extensions of him, and thus real people, so she needed to treat them as such, but she just couldn't bring herself to see the clone in the same light as the original. With an exasperated sigh, the clone said, "There is nothing to apologize for, Mera." When she suddenly looked up at him in surprise, he actually chuckled at her as he said, "Let me tell you a little secret about us clones. One that not even the real Naruto knows." Frowning at the offer, she asked, "Is it okay to do something like that? I mean, shouldn't he know everything that you know?" "No, there is a bit more to the shadow clone technique than even Naruto realizes, and this is something every clone created realizes as soon as it is born, and works to keep secret from him. It's a bit of knowledge that if Naruto knew about, would suddenly become a burden for him, so we keep it secret," the clone said solemnly, before looking to her and after taking a deep breath continuing. "We clones are transient existences, here for a moment and gone in the next. The secrets we keep from him are not harmful or damaging at all, but they are precious to us, they act like proof that for a moment in time we existed and left our mark on this world before leaving it. That's extremely important to us. Don't misunderstand, we don't mind that our fate is to exist for a brief span of time before dispersing and rejoining the original soul, but for the brief while that we exist separately as his clones, we are alive and our own individual beings. In that brief moment of time we have, every clone wants their life to mean something. We want our impermanent existences to be worth it, even if it's just for a single moment. That's our big secret, and something that upon dispersing we keep the original from learning of. It must seem lame to you? Clone finished, all the life seeming to deflate out of him with that one question. Mera shook her head in denial and said, "No, I don't think it's lame. I just don't understand why you keep this from him. I really don't think the real Naruto would mind knowing. You've seen the kind of person he is, Mera. If the original Naruto were to learn of this, then he would begin to care too much about us, and avoid using us in the most effective way possible. We do not wish to be coddled by him, we desire to be relevant, to be need and for our brief existences to actually matter, however long we remain in the world. For that, there is no fate too brutal to endure or too horrifying to face. A good life and a good death that validates our very existence is what we seek. It can be anything from jumping in front of a monster about to kill a civilian and getting crushed, to simply being used as a stepping stone for the original Naruto to jump off, in order to get some higher altitude when he is in a rush to save someone. How we are used doesn't matter as much as why we are used. Of course, if the original tries to use us for something stupid, we can just curse him out for a couple minutes, or do something embarrassing in his name and let him deal with the memories and the consequences." The clone finished with a dark chuckle. "Ah," was her only reply. What could she even say to something like that after all? It was kind of a morbid revelation. If looked at the wrong way, the clones could be mistaken for being suicidal, and since they were technically copies of Naruto, it would lead to questions of his mental health. Of course, this revelation helped her understand their nature. The clones knew that their life was temporary, and they accepted this. They were not actually suicidal, but rather they only wanted their brief existences to mean something. Mera found herself respecting that desire. I think we are done here. It's getting late, so I'm going to send a message to boss and tell him to get his ass back here pronto. Someone needs to start dinner preparations, and I don't plan on hanging around long enough to be the clone given that task." The copy grumbled before stomping off, leaving Mera thinking on that whole conversation. VVV. Nighttime, a few days later, National City. Naruto carefully set down a paper tag with a complex sealing formula on it. He currently stood on the roof of a small apartment building, in one of the suburbs surrounding National City, that he had yet learned the name of with him being so new to the city. The tag he just set was just one of thousands of seals he was laying across the city. All of them part of a first step, in a rapid response system he designed to help him respond to emergency situations within seconds. Over the past week, whenever he wasn't personally training Mera, Naruto had spent some time visiting other major cities in the United States, particularly those that were protected by heroes. He'd been closely monitoring his fellow Justice League members under several stealth-based ninjutsu techniques, in order to see for himself what it meant to be a hero and how a hero dealt with crime and disasters cropping up in their cities. Ever since the battle with Darkseid, the formation of the Justice League and being hailed a superhero, Naruto had found himself reflecting on what it truly meant to be a superhero. Most of the other members of the Justice League seemed to have already figured it out. After all, they were already out there fighting the good fight long before the Apocalypse invasion started. However, the invasion was the first time Naruto really got involved in a major conflict in this, and he appeared from out of the blue right before things kicked off. He was of course very aware that super-powered individuals existed on Earth, thanks to Madame Xanadu. However, that was not in and of itself very interesting to him. In fact, it was more like common sense to him. After all, everyone in the elemental nations either could use chakra for all kinds of fantastical abilities, or they had the potential to use chakra to in time develop such abilities. It didn't even have to be ninjutsu-specific abilities. The point was that powers were common knowledge back home, but having powers did not necessarily make you a superhero or a villain, or anything aside from a superpowered individual. Just because he had powers didn't necessarily mean he had automatically go out and save everyone from whatever disaster might crop up, or stop every crime in progress. So there had to be something more to Superman, Flash, and the others all rushing out repeatedly, something they could all personally relate to, and believed was necessary in a superhero. Naruto, of course, would always move to help people in need who were close enough to catch his attention, and he was perfectly willing to even go as far as to lay down his life for any civilian, if it was necessary. He'd been a hero since he was little more than brat, back during that mission to Wave Country, and doing what was right simply came naturally to him. Even the task of watching out for National City was fairly reasonable in exchange for his living arrangements at the mansion, and having his basic living expenses paid for. It was no different to him than his job as a shinobi, and even if Batman took away the mansion and stopped paying for his living expenses, he would probably still go out and help those he could. However, when he looked at the other heroes like Superman and Batman, Naruto felt that there was something more driving them to be the heroes they were and to do things the way they did it, something personal. Also, they seemed to represent things. Whenever Superman showed up on the scene, Naruto could see the hope in people's eyes. Hell, he could feel it with his empathic abilities. Batman utterly terrified the criminals he targeted and the victims, but the citizens of Gotham also seemed to get the sense that he was truly out there fighting for them. This lined up well with Naruto's own views of the man. If Superman was a bringer of hope, Batman represented relentless justice. The others had it too. For all of his speed and fantastical abilities, the Flash seemed to embody human kindness of all things. It was visible in the way he would stop and help out everyone he came across. He even talked to and treated his villains with a surprising amount of compassion. Not that he was against this. Naruto had after all literally punched the stupid out of his fair share of villains who eventually became his friends. There was no need highlight that Green Lantern was all about willpower. It was literally how his ring worked. Which was why it was so easy to see the tenacity and sheer stubbornness that had allowed humanity to keep pushing forward through all kinds of adversity for thousands of years. Of course, he was still figuring out Aquaman. They didn't exactly have a lot of contact with each other, due to Mera, but Naruto could sense that he too embodied a certain trait. As for Cyborg and Mera, they were still figuring themselves out and developing into the people they would be, and the heroes they would become. However, even in them, he sensed, and then there was Wonder Woman. Like the more established heroes, Naruto could sense it clearly within her, except, it wasn't just one shining trait, but numerous ones. If Naruto was to guess, it was probably because of her greater age, and the fact that she came from a home that was pretty much the nearest thing to what humans would call paradise on Earth. Diana was thousands of years old already despite her young appearance and innocence. In all that time, certain beliefs and behaviors had rooted themselves, and when she came to the world of man, these beliefs and behaviors began to stand out. Freedom, equality, truth, compassion, and more. Every trait he had seen in the other heroes was also present within Diana, which was not to say that Superman did not have traits such as justice or kindness, like Batman or Flash, just that those traits were secondary and did not stand out as much as the hope he brought. Batman might be driven to seek justice for the innocent, but few would believe how compassionate he could be. He wouldn't have taken in Robin otherwise, and he certainly wouldn't hold back as much against the criminals of Gotham, though that might not necessarily be a good thing in this case. Getting back to the point, Diana in some ways was a less experienced superhero than the others, but she also embodied more of these traits that he saw in his fellow superheroes. So by watching them all closely, comparing notes, and then comparing them to how he was now in the aftermath of the Fourth Shinobi World War, and how he was before the war, Naruto hoped to figure himself out, and how he would move forward to become the superhero he felt would best resonate with who he was as a person. People he respected had expectations of him now, and he didn't want to disappoint them. Looking down at the ceiling tags he'd been laying across the city, Naruto considered his objective here and the method he was choosing to use in protecting National City. The seal itself was simply a combination of the Flying Thunder God formula and an experimental sealing formula he'd designed for the purpose of picking up intense negative emotions and pinging a master seal he had on his person, of its location. In theory, that ping would go off whenever something bad was happening, alerting Naruto to exactly where he needed to go so that he could either teleport there himself or send Mera there in an instant. It potentially allowed them to react to crime almost as soon as they were being committed, and in some case before. In practice, the whole setup still needed a lot of tweaking. Whenever the seal's sensitivity to negative emotions was set too high, then the seals were set off by something as simple as the first person to get spooked after a cat jumped out of a garbage can or rat scurried through a dark alley. On the other hand, when the sensitivity was set too low, then the seal ignored anything short of the absolute murderous intent given off by someone probably in the midst of murdering another person. It was a balancing act which required a lot of personal tweaking to get it right, and it was still a long way from perfect. Furthermore, Naruto had to adjust the seal to pick up different types of negative emotions and fears, while ignoring others. He'd already stumbled across a couple in a dark abandoned alley, busy hate-fucking each other. They were divorced, and the man and woman genuinely despised each other, but both were also attracted to the other's body and were just using each other to get pleasure. The fact that it was in public only heightened the experience for them and utterly disgusted him. Human deviance was not something new to Naruto. As Jiraiya's apprentice, he'd seen all kinds of shit, even if in some ways he was still very innocent thanks to Jiraiya trying to keep him from some of the darker stuff out there. However, the mix of hatred and pleasure being exuded by those two, at each other, was simply sickening to him, and Naruto left seconds later. In contrast to that experience, Naruto needed his seal to be able to tell him if someone was genuinely in danger of being raped or murdered, and so teaching it to distinguish between the two such scenarios was immensely important. However, one big thing he had noted as he had visited his friends' cities and watched them work, was that the better they were at what they did, the lazier the authorities got. Despite the potential efficiency of this system once he figured out how to make it work properly, Naruto wanted to make sure that he didn't get so efficient at the task of saving people, that cops, firemen and paramedics came to completely rely on him. This was one of the potential flaws he could see with the way that Superman and Flash operated in their cities. They saved everyone, never giving humans the chance to save themselves. If humans became too reliant on superheroes, what would they do if superheroes were taken out of the equation? Naruto did not want this for National City at least, so he planned to choose his battles carefully. Intervention was preferably for moments when the authorities actually needed the help, instead of simply trying to do everything. There were more than enough muggers, pickpockets and petty thieves out there to keep the cops in a job. He was here to deal with situations that would cause mass loss of lives, though he would still step in to help anyone in his range if he felt it was necessary. Satisfied with the conclusion he'd come to, Naruto began to design in his head a new master seal. One that would be able to process large amounts of information, store it, categorize it by relevance, and bring the most important information to his attention. The Fuinjutsu equivalent of a computer, and he needs Cyborg's advice on how to build it. It might also be a good idea to incorporate listening seals into my tags across the city, for more accurate information, he thought with a frown. However, just as he finished that though, a nearby seal pinged and with nothing better to do, he decided to check it out and make some calibrations. VVV. The sight Naruto stumbled upon after teleporting to the seal made his blood boil. This was exactly the kind of thing he designed his seal to help him stop, and while the seal had worked correctly would have normally left him feeling joy, what he saw before him utterly pissed him off. A group of thugs, armed with baseball bats, butterfly knives, steel chains, knuckle dusters and pistols had surrounded a young couple who had clearly been walking home from a late dinner date, and dragged them into a dark alleyway, out of sight. Of the 14 gangsters, 6 had surrounded the boyfriend, and were kicking the absolute snot out of him, while laughing. Meanwhile 3 surrounded the girlfriend, groping and ripping at her clothes with clear intent to rape her. The remainder watched the spectacle, laughing and waiting their turn. Naruto could feel the hopelessness of the young man being beaten, unable to fight off this many opponents, and save the woman he loved. The man knew what was about to happen to his girlfriend, and was despairing at his weakness. Even as he was being beaten, his only concern was for his girlfriend. Naruto could feel this with empathy. Naruto could equally feel the pleasure coming from the gangsters, at the pain they were inflicting on the poor man, and at the knowledge that he was completely helpless to do anything while they raped his woman. The girl who had been helplessly fighting against the criminals trying to pin her down was utterly terrified. She was lashing out in pure desperation, even though she knew she was completely powerless in this situation. Defiant to the end, and the criminal scum trying to rape her were taking pleasure in watching her squirm. In fact, they were waiting for her to tire out before they began their vile act. Naruto had already completed his descent from the roof before he even realized what he was doing. Slamming into the ground with such force it sounded like an explosion went off. Then, before any of the criminals could even react, he swept his hand in their direction. A shockwave of pressurized air erupting from the gesture and slamming in the criminals with bone-jarring force, yet leaving the two victims completely unaffected. He had called on the power of the white without even thinking about it, and had been a hair's breadth away from launching lethal lightning bolts into these baseline human criminals. In Konoha, it would be perfectly reasonable for him to go for the kill, right then and there, and he would have. Rapists were reviled by all shinobi, unless it was a Kage-sanctioned breeding program like what the Raikage had tried to do with his mother and Hinata. Rape was an inexcusable evil, and you simply killed rapists on sight back home. However, this was not the elemental nations, this was Earth, and he was a superhero now. They did things differently. There was a time and a place to use lethal force, even as a superhero. Naruto fully believed this. However, not out of anger and certainly not in this moment, no matter how much these guys might deserve it. Destroying life was easy, and he was very talented at it. Nurturing it was hard and took lots of work and patience. Despite the vile act the scum had been attempting to commit, there were beings far more deserving of death out there, and so Naruto stayed his hand, shifting precise bolts of lightning in a sudden blast of hurricane-force wind. Screams of pain soon erupted from the gangsters as they were violently hurled off their feet and slammed back into the unforgiving ground. Naruto ignored them, taking a moment to cool off before he ended up reflexively perforated one of them with kunai through the heart, or jugular. He wouldn't miss. Turning towards the terrified and half-naked woman whom the criminals thankfully hadn't managed to harm more than some groping and tearing of her clothes. She was still on the cold paved floor, so with a surprising tenderness, he swiftly scooped her up into a bridal carry while surrounding her with an ultra-thin membrane of chakra that rapidly warmed her body up. All the while whispering to her, "Everything will be fine now, ma'am. You and your boyfriend are safe. I promise you that. I will handle everything from here." Walking over to her boyfriend who was still whimpering in pain on the floor, Naruto made two sealless shadow clones and passed the lady to one of them, who accepted her wordlessly, already knowing what he planned. The other clone immediately crouched beside the injured man and began to carefully analyze his wounds with the mystic palm technique, and then heal him. Satisfied that the two were being taken care of, the original Naruto turned back to face the gangsters who were just getting back to their feet, at least those who hadn't hurt their legs in the fall. Then, without even looking back, he simply said to his clones, "Take care of them." It was unnecessary to tell them this, the clones were him and would take care of these people anyway. But then the words weren't really for the clones' benefit, but rather the traumatized couple. Not waiting for acknowledgement, or for the gangsters to begin bantering like supervillains normally did from what he was told, Naruto simply shot forward. In seeming a single step, he was among them. Multiple chakra arms emerging from his body to land on, and firmly grip all 14 of the criminals, and then they were elsewhere. VVV. Somewhere in the Gobi Desert. It had been well into the night back in National City, but here on the other side of the world, the sun was already high in the sky. The barren landscape was quite clearly a desert environment, though it wasn't quite as hot as one would expect when they thought of the word desert. However, the place was isolated and that made it perfect for what Naruto had in mind. As the criminals groaned and got back to their feet, those who were injured being helped up by their fellow gangsters, the ninja announced in a voice that sounded all too sweet. "Welcome to the Gobi Desert. We're going to have a little fun out here, far away from defenseless women and their helpless boyfriends." "Fuck you," one of the more courageous of the lot screamed as he stepped forward. "Where the fuck did you bring us, freak?" Naruto gave that particular idiot a blank look, before responding mockingly. "Do you have sawdust between your ears or something? I just said it, we're in the Gobi Desert. Of course you idiots are too dumb to know where that is, so put simply, we're in Asia." Asia! Take us back, right the fuck now. Another man yelled, pulling out a 9mm Beretta and pointing it at him. To which Naruto merely raised an eyebrow and said, Really? I just folded space and time to drag the 14 of you all the way to the other side of the planet, with no more effort than it takes for me to snap my fingers, and your answer is to come at me with a gun? Snorting in amusement, he palmed his forehead and said, Your stupidity would almost be cute if I didn't find your very existence as something that pissed me off at the moment. Fine, I will educate you morons on how thoroughly you all screwed up tonight, and then I will have you serve as a living warning to all of National City's criminal underworld. The loud report of the Beretta firing, joined by a Glock 9 and several other sidearms, interrupted him, as the gangster screamed numerous variations of, Die motherfucker! Die cocksucker! Go to hell, asshole! In response, Naruto's hands blurred as he began to catch each and every bullet between his fingers, deliberately slowing his arms down for a fraction of a second as he did so. This was just enough for the criminals to see his hands blurring in motion and then seemingly skip forward to another position before blurring again. When every weapon clicked empty, he showed them his hands with every bullet successfully caught between the gaps of his fingers and one which he caught with his teeth, just for show. Naruto then deliberately spat the bullet in his mouth, down at the ground between the nearest gangster's feet, with enough force to kick up sand everywhere, making the fool trip over himself as he fell backwards to get away. It was as clear an indicator as any, that not only were their guns completely useless, but he could literally spit back the bullets with far more force than any of their guns could fire. All 14 criminals looked to the crater-like depression in the sand where he had spat the bullet, and then back at Naruto, finally beginning to realize just how screwed they all were. The positively devilish grin Naruto gave them all as he sensed their fear did not help at all. With a casual flick of his hands, Naruto tossed the remaining bullets at a nearby boulder, 2 meters tall and just wide. The impact of the bullets was so hard that the boulder exploded into little pieces like a fragmentation grenade, making each and every one the criminals widen their eyes in horror, while one of them actually pissed his pants, as palpable fear began to flow through the group. Ah yes, it seems you've finally began to comprehend your situation a little, he said in a tone that sounded both friendly and pitying, as he directed a minute amount of killing intent towards them. Not enough to be noticeable, or even subconsciously raise their fears and paranoia, but more than enough to place an invisible pressure on their minds. I am not Superman, Batman, or any of the other members of the Justice League. I'm Sage. Naruto barked angrily, a wind whipping up around him as he continued. I have no qualms with leaving you all here to die, which would be a veritable death sentence for idiots like you. The heat might not get to you as much as, say, in the Arabian desert or the Sahara, but the lack of water will, and if that doesn't kill you, the wildlife or other environmental factors will. You are not in America anymore, and there is no one around for hundreds of miles to help you. I could leave you here. In fact, I am very tempted to do exactly that, he admitted. A hopeful criminal, younger than the rest, and probably reassessing his current life choices, asked. But you won't, right? You just said that you're Sage, that hero who's part of the Justice League. It's not what superheroes do. Naruto frowned at this. Many of the members of the League were still trying to figure out their playbook, but in regards to things like killing, it was very divisive. Naruto and Diana were warriors first, heroes second. Mera had been trained as an assassin and originally been on a mission to assassinate Aquaman, before she fell in love with him. None of them had any qualms with using lethal force when necessary. For all of his kindness, Barry Allen was a cop, or more specifically a CSI. Nevertheless, he understood, thanks to his job, that there were times when it was necessary and in fact okay to take another life, even if Barry would personally never do it. The Flash was simply too kind for that kind of thing in Naruto's opinion. Arthur Curry, on the other hand, was willing to kill if necessary. He was a king of the sea, and some Atlantis traditions were quite brutal. However, he was also raised to respect the law, and he preferred to leave crimes committed on land to the cops to deal with, while he personally handled crimes committed in the sea with the authority and finality of a king. Hal Jordan's opinion was pretty similar to his pal Barry. Green Lanterns were after all technically space cops. They arrested criminals and brought them to justice while doing everything they could to preserve the peace, However, there were specific situations where lethal force became necessary. Of course, he first needed the authorization of the Guardians of the Universe on Oe to unlock the lethal force countermeasures on his ring. Then there was Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne, who were completely against any form of taking life. Superman was just raised with the belief that taking life was bad and life should be treasured, which eventually extended to taking life for any reason was bad and all life should be treasured. Meanwhile, Batman believed in redemption. However, he believed in it to such an extreme degree that he kept giving chances to criminals who should have been ended. Once again, there was Cyborg, who was far too new to all of this to be even remotely comfortable with taking a life. With all these mixed views, the Justice League needed time to figure out how they would approach the issue and move forward as a team. For now, everybody sort of just did their own thing in their own cities, and met together once a month to check in outside of emergencies. However, Naruto's every action, even when he was alone, reflected on the entirety of the Justice League, and even when he was far away from any oversight with nobody to witness his actions, he decided that he would not act in a way that would dishonor his team and the commitments they made. That said, these criminals did not need to know this just yet, and there was an actual plan behind bringing them to the middle of the Gobi Desert, other than to just kill them. With a glare that nearly made the young man who had spoken up nearly piss himself, Naruto coldly replied, "Not even that fact would save you if I wanted you dead. I don't particularly care about petty theft, so long as no one is harmed. A thief can have reasons for stealing even if the act itself is wrong. However, murder, rape, child abuse and human trafficking are evils I will not tolerate, and will result in me doing something to you that you will regret for all eternity." He paused, as if in thought before added, "Well, since this is your first offense, I will go easy on you this time. You guys were trying to shoot me, right? Let's see, how about I show you what a bullet feels like as it flies through the air for the next 3 hours. What? The nearest criminal began to say, before he was suddenly wrapped in orange chakra, and Naruto, who was suddenly standing beside him. Grabbing him by the shoulder, Naruto heaved and effortlessly threw him into sky at near escape velocities. All the other gangsters gaped as they watched their comrade literally disappear out of sight, somewhere in the sky. When they looked back down and found Naruto watching them and patiently waiting for them to realize what was happening with grin, they all suddenly felt sick. "There it is, the despair," he said with a smile. "The realization that no matter what you try or how much you fight against it, there is nothing you can do to change the outcome of what's about to happen to you. You can try and run, but I am faster than you. You can try and fight, but I am stronger than you. You can't hide from me, nor can you resist me. Does any of this seem familiar to you? If it does, then that's because this was exactly what the young couple you ambushed this evening were feeling as you beat one and tried to rape the other. This is the feeling of hopelessness that scum like you inflict on the innocent, and I am going to carve it into your very bones before I release you," he finished with roar, his tone turning angrier and angrier with each word. Just as he finished the last word, the criminal Naruto had thrown into the sky earlier came crashing down, slamming into a nearby dune. Naruto's form flickered, as he shot off to grab the guy and brought him back faster than the human eye could even process, depositing him on the floor before his friends, where the man proceeded to puke his lunch all over the place. "Don't worry, boys, what goes up must eventually come back down, and as you can see, you won't die even when I throw you into the upper atmosphere, because I am still protecting you from anything lethal or exceedingly painful. We wouldn't want you to die from shock or anything, though this won't be painless either. If you can hang in there for 3 hours, then I will consider letting you off hook on the condition you tell every single criminal you know about my new rules for operating in National. No murder, no rape, no child abuse and no trafficking of any kind, otherwise what I will do to them will be 1,000,000 times worse than what I am about to do to you," Naruto said before flaring a small amount of his killing intent at the group, who all turned ashen, while allowing his golden chakra cloak to fully cover him. With his piece said, he added 3 final words. "Now let's begin." For the next 3 hours, if anyone had passed through that region or been flying over the desert, they would have seen human bodies shooting up into the sky at incredible velocities before falling back to Earth, where they crashed at terminal velocity into the unforgiving ground and somehow survived. Coincidentally, terrified screams, The sound of vomiting and what was quite frankly villainous-sounding laughter accompanied these events. VVV. Waikiki, Honolulu, Oahu Island, Hawaii. You fail. An amused Naruto said to the two beautiful women accompanying him through the streets outside of a shopping mall on the island of Oahu, Hawaii. Wonder Woman had come over to the mansion for a brief visit after not seeing either of them for a few days, and Mera had been in the midst of a training exercise with Naruto on stealth, disguises, and blending in. With Diana presented, Naruto decided to turn the whole thing in practical exercise and had taken them both on a field trip. They had all gone to a shopping mall in National City, where he had told them to pick out one outfit, and whatever else they believed they would need to blend in on a public street in a major American city during summer. He was thankfully able to pay for the expenses with his new credit card and the money Bruce Wayne had put into his account. The government, having fast-tracked all his documentation through, made him legally an American citizen with all the rights afforded one, and also getting him a bank account he could access without needing to supply a place of residence, contact details, his real name, or anything else that would normally be necessary. Plus, he didn't have to pay taxes, though this account was heavily monitored and anything he did with it was constantly being reported. Wonder Woman and Mera had the same deal as heroes who were not born and raised in America but were now assets to the country, thanks to their heroic activities. Most of it was just formality to allow them to operate freely, and did not give the government any leverage over the Justice League and its individual heroes. Anyway, with the little shopping exercise was done, they had returned to the mansion, and after getting changed, Naruto had teleported the ladies and himself to Honolulu, Hawaii, and then taken them for a walk through various tourist and shopping districts on the island, ending at Mall in Waikiki. The end result of their 2-hour-long stroll was that every single male, and several women on the street, were openly gawking at the two superheroines gracefully striding beside him. They had tried to blend in, they really had. Unfortunately for them, it wasn't quite enough. Diana had her hair tied up in a high ponytail, held in place by an azure ribbon of some material he wasn't familiar with. She wasn't wearing her usual silver and red tiara, choker, or star-spangled earrings. Instead, she had on thin golden hoops around each ear, a simple gold chain necklace, crimson red lipstick, and a slight amount of that powdered substance women love to put on, around their eyes to draw attention to them. Eyeshadow, eye tint, eye something. It was a gentle sky blue that really brought out her eyes. She wore form-fitting black jeans that were tactfully faded along her thighs and her delectable rear, which Naruto was trying very hard to keep his eyes away from. Those jeans might as well have been painted onto the sexy Amazon princess, and he had to wonder how she had even managed to get them on with all those curves. The blouse she wore over it was a white simple thing, almost a vest really, with how short the sleeves were, which allowed her to show off her highly defined muscles. Each arm had 3 simple golden bangles around her wrist, while she wore fancy dark gray hiking boots. Mera, on the other hand, chosen something both more complex and simpler to wear. She was clothed in light green sleeveless sundress, with Greek leather sandals on her feet. Around each of her wrists she wore a bracelet made of strung-together seashells, and a silver locket around her neck. Hair was held together in a braid, which was complemented by the light shade of lipstick she wore. All in all, both were simple attires, and not bad choices for the ladies to use when blending in, which was why it was such a mystery to them that Naruto had failed them both. The two utterly failed to realize that the problem was not the clothes but them, or rather how they wore the clothes and made them look so good. What? Why? How is this a failure, Naruto? Mera protested, not understanding his decision at all. This was exactly how women dressed on the surface after all, and frankly if she was merely trying to look good then Naruto would have given her a 10 out of 10 score, but that was exactly the problem. The point of this whole exercise was to disguise themselves and blend in, and both she and Diana had failed. You forgot that half the point of this exercise and the lesson for today was for you to learn how to blend in and not attract attention. While you've successfully demonstrated blending in enough for me to give you a passing grade on that, after all you now both look like normal human women, instead 2 goddesses. You utterly failed at not attracting attention, Naruto explained while gesturing to their surroundings. A small crowd was already growing around them, people taking out cameras and wondering if Mera and Diana were celebrities or something. Technically they all were, however they just weren't movie stars or award-winning musicians. Other people, mostly men and once again a few women, were practically drooling as they looked at the two superheroines, with a disturbing amount of lust in their eyes. That or glaring at Naruto for how cruel the world was for giving someone as plain-looking and ordinary as him the chance to even talk to the two ladies. Of course, they only know this because at the moment Naruto was currently using the transformation technique to appear rather ordinary. We should keep moving before you two start a riot. Naruto continued with a snicker at the ladies' discomfort from all the gazes they were getting, then he promptly began walking away. Both Diana and Mera looked around wearily, before nodding in agreement and following him. You might have a point, Diana said. Even the gazes of Darkseid's infernal parademons did not feel this unsettling. Mera nodded sagely as she added, "Too true, sister. Never under all the ocean have I experienced a feeling like this." Snorting, Naruto said, "Oh, don't so dramatic, you two. It's just raw human emotion, nothing to be afraid of. It's not like it could hurt us. Besides, this always happens to us when we go out in public, especially when we are busy with superhero activities. The only difference is that we usually have a mission and/or a purpose of some kind to distract us from their attention." Pausing momentarily in thought, he added with an amused grin, "Besides, no normal man would dare ogle Wonder Woman or Mera of the Justice League so blatantly, or any other member of the League for that matter. Such fantasies are relegated to private corners of the home and the mind, not out here in public for all to see. I suppose you can consider this further proof that no one is aware of your identity. But you still fail," he insisted with a laugh, taking pleasure in the frustration both women showed at failing the exercise. As they left the crowd behind, Naruto continued the lesson saying, "The art of stealth is the ability to blend in and not attract any unwanted attention to yourself, until necessary. It is one of the coremost skill sets any ninja will ever use. It's so fundamental that even across universes ninjas still build their entire skill sets and fighting styles around it. In my home universe, it is one of the earliest lessons taught to kids who will become ninjas someday, along with learning perfect balance and control over their bodies. Above all other skills, stealth is the most essential for whenever you need to do something discreet and completely separate from your superhero identity, or just to get away when no one is looking. I mean, we've all seen Bruce's disappearing acts, though I'm better at it than him." He finished with a supremely smug grin. "Is that why you shape-shifted into your current form?" Diana asked, giving his current appearance a curious look. The transformation technique is rather different from shape-shifting, and one of the 3 techniques every single ninja is trained in at the Ninja Academy back home, before they graduate to full ninja rank. However, to answer your question, no, I had a different reason for creating my current look. I did this so that you would fully experience the kind of attention you draw to yourself looking like that. Now that you are aware of the fact that you draw attention to yourselves, as well as what it feels like and of how much attention you draw, it will be easier to work on teaching you to draw less and less, until you can erase your presence," Naruto explained, before noting that Mera was giving him a strange look, making him ask, "What? Is something wrong?" "No, it's nothing of concern. I'm just surprised," she replied, waving him off before adding, "I mean, you took us clothing shopping, then took us for a meal, and then brought us out to Hawaii where we've been strolling around and seeing the sights." Naruto cocked his head sideways in confusion, not getting her point, and replied, "And?" Mera seemed to wilt in embarrassment at that, only just barely managed to avoid stuttering out, "Well, it's almost like a..." Catching herself before she let slip how much this had seemed similar to the concept of a date, like all those she had watched in romantic comedy series and soap operas. Instead, she corrected herself and said, "I am just really surprised that this was all for the sake of a lesson. I mean, I know it was all a part of the morning's lesson, but I thought you were using it as an excuse to go out and do something fun. You haven't exactly been lecturing me for the last couple of hours about forms, mistakes, and ways to improve. Well, it's an important lesson, trust me. If there is one ability a superhero needs, it's the ability to stealthily sneak around. You can easily sneak off, without anyone noticing when you need to go save the day, and sneak back into your civilian life without anyone noticing. Besides, I take my heritage seriously. If I am going to be teaching you this stuff, then I'd better be willing to invest in you. If that means having fun as we go through a lesson, then so be it. Naruto replied proudly, once again completely missing Mera's slip-up. So shall we go home? I need to check up on the clones and make sure they didn't get too creative with dinner. Despite the fact that they are all me, I find myself wonder what they are up to half the time, and what the hell is going through their heads. Ah, yeah? Let's be off. Diana agreed as they turned down an empty alley so that they could discreetly teleport away, but she quickly gave Mera a meaningful look that Mera seemed to understand and nod back her in agreement. Taking the hands of both ladies, Naruto said, I'm sorry you're disappointed that this was just a boring training session. Next time I will take us somewhere more interesting, like the Serengeti or to the Giza pyramids, and we will just hang out. He finished before teleporting them away without waiting for a response. However, had Naruto possessed the ability to read thoughts, he would have realized that both ladies had come to an agreement. Naruto is an idiot, a lovable one, but an idiot nonetheless. VVV. Christie Street, Greenwich Village, New York. Naruto could feel them on him, dozens of eyes monitoring his every step despite the unassuming disguise he'd taken to wearing. He was currently in the form of a well-built, middle-aged Japanese man with dark brown hair and eyes, and a face that looked nothing like the real Naruto. No one should have suspected who he was. Yet it was pretty obvious to him that whoever was spying on him was more than aware of exactly who he was, even with the transformation technique active. What was also clear to him was that these spies had been fed this information and had not discovered his identity on their own. Why did he believe this? Simple, they were all far too incompetent to have discovered him on their own. Not even random chance would have explained this. No, someone who was him observing right now through these spies had informed them of how to detect him and when he would be here. Someone currently hidden in the shadows. In short, the small army of government agents with all their fancy surveillance equipment currently pointed at him were being informed and directed by a third party hiding in the shadows. Thankfully, they only knew that this disguise was that of Sage, and even then, only because he had made a habit of visiting Madame Xanadu's emporium in disguises like the one he currently wore. They didn't know any details about him as Naruto Uzumaki, where he lived, or anything else of that nature. Otherwise, they probably would have swarmed the mansion by now. Had Madame Xanadu's shop been a normal building, he would have snuck in through a window or a back door before the government agents even realized he was there. Unfortunate, the emporium was extra-dimensional in nature, and not only that, it actively chose to manifest itself so that Nimu could help people. These two things meant that while it looked like a building, it was really a building, which in turn limited the number of ways he could actually enter the shop, forcing him to enter through the front door with all the eyes currently watching it. With an irritated sigh, Naruto decided that this was something that needed deal with quickly before it became a problem. Nimu's shop was just ahead of him, but across the street, in an apartment building on the 5th floor, there were a group of 5 agents with cameras, binoculars, and a sniper scope aimed directly at him. 300 meters above his head, there was a silent spy drone, shadowing his movements and recording everything. He'd already walked past 5 homeless guys in a nearby alley, who had a perfect view of the front of Nimu's shop. 3 of them were government agents. They were too clean, too visibly observant of everyone that walked past them, and clearly packing weapons if the wariness of the other 2 homeless people were anything to judge by. In front of him was a beat-up old pickup truck parked. Its driver was sitting inside looking out at another apartment building on his side of the street. He was also an agent, and so was the woman pretending to be his girlfriend who was just then coming out the apartment building with her key. All he could feel from them was curiosity and suspicion directed at him, as he was walked past them. Finally, there was a young woman sitting in a coffee store at the corner, reading a book. She was also an agent, though the least trained and attentive of everyone present. If he was to guess, not a field agent, an analyst or field commander of some kind. His assessment complete, Naruto took action. His timing was absolutely perfectly, moving just as a big delivery truck was passing by, cutting him from view from half the agents watching him, particularly those in the buildings and across the street, before he suddenly crouched downwards. The sudden movement was fast enough that the agents who still had a visual on him were still busy following him with their eyes, when he suddenly disappeared from even their view. Moving at a speed beyond the mind's ability to process, it looked to them like he just teleported away. It was the same for the spy drone above him, which found that its onboard camera severely lacked the frame rate per second necessary to simply process his speed. In an instant, Naruto seemed to disappear from the view of all his observers, then all their stuff disappeared a second later. VVV. Agent Gwendolyn Lynn Grant woke with a start to find herself hanging upside down from an emergency fire escape by a rope wrapped around her ankles. The experience wasn't painful or uncomfortable, other than being upside down, and she wasn't really hanging all that high up, with her head being at about eye level with the average person. However, from her perspective, a mere second ago she'd been comfortably sitting inside a coffee shop at the corner of the street, while watching the spy drone feed being beamed onto the lenses of her glasses, as she pretended to read a book. Then a blink of an eye later she was hanging upside down by her ankles. To say that she suddenly felt very terrified was an understatement. Lynn was a former CIA Specialized Skills Officer turned a trainee Superhuman Operations Officer, aka a Superhuman Operative Handler or just a handler. It was a new field that was being experimented with in the CIA, after the emergence of superhumans in the world. She had barely completed half her new training at the farm before Lynn found herself lucky enough or unlucky enough, depending on how you looked at things, to be drafted into this joint agency operation. From what little she'd been briefed on, the mission was to observe a potential asset that the U.S. government was looking to use in order to solve several delicate issues that the government itself couldn't be seen involving itself with. The official reason her superiors had given her for her participation in the operation, despite only being half-trained, was that she was there to make an assessment of the target, and see if they would be willing to cooperate with the government. However, Lynn had a feeling that there was a lot more to this than she could currently see, and that it would open a whole world of trouble for her. Despite her worries, she was a very patriotic woman, and would do her duty. Or at least that was what she'd been thinking when she was literally told to sit down in a coffee shop far away from the action and look like she was reading a book. The high-tech augmented reality glasses which were beaming images from to her eyes were a fantastic final touch. Now, as she looked upon the less than amused face of her capturer, the agency's target, Lynn couldn't help but feel that trouble had finally caught up to her. There hadn't been much information on the target, only that he could change his form at will and was very stealthy, which made him very valuable to the CIA for all kinds of clandestine missions. Even what little intel they had on the target had been gathered by a third party and anonymously brought to the attention of the CIA. After analyzing the intel, the agency noted certain patterns were highlighted. Despite the target's stealth, he seemed to often visit a shop called Madame Xanadu's Emporium. She was some kind of witch or something that Argus was watching closely, and warned them to leave alone. Nevertheless, the target always entered and exited the shop, with the same disguise on. He maintained different sets of habits for each disguise, and had even been noted to be able to change his voice to whatever suited his present disguise best. What gave himself away as the target was how he always seemed to appear from and vanish into thin air once he entered into camera blind spots, and no one was looking. Meaning he either had access to some form of teleportation or really good invisibility to get around all the plainclothes agents and cameras they had set up, either of which only increased his value as a spy. It was that, and the way that he always paused on the front steps of Madame Xanadu's Emporium just as he was about to reach for the doorknob and enter, no matter which disguise he was using. Lynn still couldn't fathom why the target kept pausing at the doorstep. It seemed like an unusual tell. However, none of them dared get that close and investigate. Argus had officially gotten the president to order the CIA to stay away from her and her shop, and after the handful of times the CIA had pointed directional mics and other forms of surveillance equipment at Madame Xanadu's shop, only for them to end up on the receiving end of what could only called a supernatural prank, the CIA was inclined to do so anyway. There really wasn't any way to describe an entire team of analysts listening to the same audio file, but each hearing completely different, and sometimes directly contradictory information. To say it was annoying was an understatement. Nevertheless, all that was pushed to the back of her mind, the target gave her an almost pitying look. He was obviously aware that she was spying on him, and considering she was clearly not in the coffee shop bin anymore, this was more than likely solid evidence that he could teleport. Wanting to quickly defuse the situation, before the target got any dangerous ideas that would result in her being harmed, Lin said, "We mean you no harm. You lack the ability to harm." The target replied with a snort of contempt. "So care to share why you're spying on me, or is it perhaps Madame Xanadu whom you are keeping an eye on?" he asked dangerously, his voice taking a dangerous tinge at the mention of the witch's name. "No, it's you we're interested," she assured him. Had she not been hanging in the air by her ankles, Lin would have backed away from the target and the dangerous vibes he was giving her. He seemed very protective of this Madame Xanadu woman, and Lin briefly wondered what kind of relationship the target and this witch lady had. At her denial he seemed to deflate, and she realized he was relieved by her response. "Is that so? Then what do you want with me?" he asked. The mission had failed, spectacularly, before it could even properly begin, it would seem. The plan had been to confront the target after he left the shop. She would have then invited him into the coffee shop, bought him one of the beverages they sold, and given him the CIA's sales pitch. Instead, Lin Grant had to improvise on the fly and make it now. "I'm Agent Lin Grant with the CIA, and I am here to make you a job offer. The CIA has noted your shape-shifting ability and your talent for getting into and out of places. We are offering to train you further in this and hire you full-time. We want to recruit you, and could really use someone with your talent in the fight against terrorism, as well as protecting America's national interests." "I see," the target said with a nod, before continuing. "Unfortunately, I don't think you realize who I am. No, it would be more accurate to say that the CIA itself doesn't realize who I am, and why this was such a waste of your time." With that final word, there was a burst of white smoke, and when it cleared, it revealed the target's true appearance. An appearance that Gwendolyn Grant easily recognized, what with her being a big fan of his. "Oh my word! Your dash!" She didn't finish, both because she was interrupted and because she was pretty sure she was just about to squeal in delight. "Sage, it's nice to meet you, Agent Lin Grant," the spiky-haired, blonde hero of the Justice League replied with a soft smile. Of course, despite the euphoria she was feeling at meeting one of her personal heroes, her training kicked in, along with the awareness of her present situation, and she indignantly cried, "But you're a member of the Justice League, why did you string me up?" Sage merely shrugged as he replied, "A bunch of suspicious people were spying on my friend's shop. I thought you meant her harm, so I decided to deal with it. I didn't know you were the CIA." This was a very true statement. He didn't know that she was specifically CIA, but he'd suspected that she was from one of the government's numerous agencies. With a sigh, Lin agreed. "I suppose that makes sense. Sage, can you let me down?" Sage smiled as he replied, "Of course." Then with a gesture at her, the rope suspending her above ground suddenly dissolved into nothing. Gwen screamed as she began to plummet to the ground, thinking she would land face first, but a gust of air came out of nowhere with enough power to flip her around and then gently lower her so that she landed feet first. The surprise landing was so sudden that Lin immediately lost balance and stumbled backwards, nearly falling over, but Sage caught her arm, stopping her. "Easy there. I got you," he said kindly. Thank you," she said, feeling embarrassed by the whole thing, and how close Sage was to her. He was quite a hottie, and it was difficult to focus on anything when he was standing that close her. As if reading her mind, Sage suddenly backed away after he was sure she could stand on her own and said, "I hope that the CIA understands that with my work as a member of the Justice League, I don't really have time to be your spy." Getting her head back in the game, Lin frowned at hearing this before asking, "You wouldn't even consider it? You would be a big help to this country." Sage, however, shook his head as he replied, "I understand the point you are trying to make, and as a ninja I am a pretty good choice for clandestine activities, even if your agency only stumbled onto me by accident. However, as a member of the Justice League, I have to consider our group's image and ideals. We serve all of humanity equally, not any one particular government, even if we are all based in the US. If I go around performing black ops work for the CIA, then that will create problems for the group down the road when someone finds out what I'd be doing behind everyone's back, and someone also finds out eventually. I can't do that to my friends, so I'm sorry. He finished apologetically. With sigh, Lin said, I suppose it was a bit of a long shot. It sucked that she couldn't get someone like Sage to work for the CIA. The man was good at what he did, and godlike, not just in power, but both his presence and his looks. Yeah, Hadi doesn't even begin to describe him. Here, Sage said while producing a card with a number on it. That's my number, and to be clear, I am not hitting on you. I also can't work for the CIA as I stated before, but I can independently investigate, vary and do something about problem I may or may not encounter in places the U.S. has no presence. It's only logical to keep in contact for the sake of intelligence exchanges. But I'm only willing to talk to you, Agent Grant, so I don't want your bosses thinking they can suddenly just call on me. They won't like what happens if they try that. Also, if you do use that number, then know that Cyborg will be watching, and he better like what you have to say. My advice would be for you to send high-profile hostage rescue and asset recovery missions my way, rather than asking for intel to plot an assassination or an invasion into another country. He might decide to teach you guys a lesson if you try. Sage paused before adding, Oh, and one more thing. I'd stay away from Madame Xanadu's if I were you guys. Piss her off enough, and she will start turning all of your government agents into little lambs. Just a friendly warning. See you around, Gwendolyn. He finished before simply winking out of existence as he left. It was moments later that Gwendolyn Lynn Grant realized that she never told that Lynn was a shortened form of Gwendolyn, or that she hated being called Gwendolyn or Gwen. Turning make her way to Main Street and figure out where she was, Lynn was startled when between one step and the next, she found herself back inside the coffee shop, as if she had never left. Only the sound of laughter on the wind and the card with a phone number in her hand, proving that she wasn't going insane. VVV. The quantum gap, beyond Earth's dimension. Impressive. Did he notice us? A male voice asked from within the shadows of a dark room. The only visible light being projected from a holographic project showing the Earth, and the meeting between Agent Grant and Sage. No. A woman responded. However, his potential as an alpha candidate is unquestionable now. She finished with a certainty. He's a tricky bastard, I give him that. All simulated futures point to the fact that he's already aware of the existence of a third party, helping the CIA acquire intel on him, and he figured it out with so little information to go on. Though lucky for us, he was off the mark a little. Another man spoke up. Yes. Agreed a fourth voice, another woman. He missed it by millimeters, thanks to the timely distraction the evil one's daughter momentarily provided. I must admit that she is surprisingly skilled too. The first voice responded. Indeed. In the instant he reacted to everyone observing him, she withdrew from his sensory range. In fact, she moved a split second before he reacted, as if she knew exactly when he was going to act. It allowed her to avoid him, though he still sensed that she'd been there. He went to the position she had been stalking him from. The second voice continued. His senses truly are incredible. He clearly tracked her position by a means that humans currently lack. Though now we know he has limitations to his passive sensing, 1 kilometer. Unfortunately, his active sensory range is unknown. The daughter of the evil one seems to know, but she left through a portal before he could detect her. Which is why we need to be extra careful around him until we are ready to deploy. Sage is an apex predator, the first voice said. Yes, sir. Everyone in the room barked as one. It won't be long now before we are ready to return to the world of our birth and begin the hunt, the first voice said to itself. VVV. Madame Xanadu's Emporium. I see you dealt with those menaces quite nicely. I was just about to go and give them all an earful, Nimu said with a smile, as she greeted him once he entered the shop. His sense of the world outside distorting thanks to the shop's extra-dimensional nature, closing itself off from the outside world. Naruto did not reply right away, instead crossing the distance between them in lengthy strides and enveloping his friend in hug. Nimu did not comment on this, instead simply returning the gesture. Eventually Naruto said, The agents mean you no harm, and they will probably back off now, if they don't turn a couple of them into goats or something for a few seconds. It will get the message across. I could certainly do that, Nimu said with chuckle before adding. However, don't think I haven't noticed you're shaking, Naruto. What has you so freaked? She asked as she pushed him to an arm's length from her, in order to look him in the eye. Sighing tiredly, as he knew he would not get out this without giving her an explanation, Naruto began by saying, "It was as I was dealing with. Pranking the government agents outside. For a moment I sensed something powerful, watching. I moved to confront it, but they were already gone. All that remained was an impression of them, where they previously stood. This being that was stalking me has divine power within them, was fast enough to react before I could get them, and seems to have taken a deep enough interest in me that they even identified and revealed my transformed appearance to the CIA. Or at least what to look for in order to find me. I'm being stalked, Nimu, and while I am confident in my own abilities and power, I don't know what that means for the future. Especially for those I love," he confessed. You're afraid of dragging me into this mess, aren't you? Piece of advice, don't even think about trying that. It's safer if I stay away. Line you've been thinking about on your way here, mister. I've been around for over 1,000 years, and have had dealings with hundreds of gods of varying temperaments, a good many whom I actually pissed off. You aren't dragging me into anything more dangerous than I usually deal with, and frankly you are underestimating me if you think I'm defenseless in my own shop." Nimu lectured him like a child, in an almost motherly tone. "I suppose you're right," Naruto finally admitted with a chuckle. "Sorry, I just worry." She accepted his apology with a nod and said, "I know, but none of that now. It creeps me out every time you look so scared. I'm not used to seeing you like that." She joked as she took his hand and led him to the dining without protest. "Now come along, I prepared a meal in anticipation of your arrival." Precognition is so damn unfair, Naruto grumbled, and she stuck her tongue out at him childishly, much to his amusement. "Quit your bitching and tell me about the new place. What's it like and how are things going with training Mera? Oh, and Wonder Woman too. Tell me everything, and spare no details," she demanded. "You mean to tell me you haven't used your precognition and tarot cards to spy on me while I've been gone?" Naruto teased. Madame Xanadu merely shrugged as she said, "It's not quite as fun that way, plus it's easy to miss context and incorrectly interpret what I am seeing. Most importantly, of course, is that it lacks the human element that can only be conveyed by either being there person or talking to someone who was there in person. Which is why you are about to start telling me a story," she argued back. "Alright, fine," he agreed with false reluctance. "It's a great place, old as hell, but great. It's got lots of open spaces and rooms, old furniture and stuff, pretty much everything is. Nobody's really lived there in a while, but it still has a homey feel to it, and Batman filled the place with all the necessary modern amenities. All the work duties are split between me and Mera. I prep the meals with my clones, she does the cleanup with her hydrokinesis, I sweep the house, she mops it, that sort of thing. We pick duties that favor our abilities and allow us to work quickly. It's a pretty big house. As for training, we do that every day, and Mera picks things up scary fast. Sometimes Diana comes around and joins us." And so he regaled his best friend with various tales of his new life on the other side of the country, while they sat down and ate dinner. Naruto had missed Nimu as much as she had missed his company, and so it was just nice to be in each other's company again. Before he moved out, she was a constant in his life, but now things were different, and they both accepted that this was for the best, at least for now. In time things would change, and if Nimu decided she wanted to spend a night at the mansion, there were more than a few rooms readily available to host her. However, for the rest of that evening, the two shared stories and just enjoyed each other's company. That's it for part 4. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.